Welcome to Reflections on Identity, a podcast series exploring educators' narratives on their professional identity. Today, we are talking to James Noble Rogers, who is the Executive Director of UCET. James, welcome to the podcast series and thank you for joining us. Could we start with you just telling us a little bit about your role?
Okay, well, I'm Executive Director of the University's Council for the Education of Teachers, or UCET for short, and we're a membership body for universities across the United Kingdom who are involved in teacher education and education research. And our three core functions are, firstly, we act as a representative body for the sector in discussions with the Department for Education, with Ofsted and other statutory agencies, and with government and statutory organisations in other parts of the UK as well, particularly Wales and Northern Ireland, less so in Scotland because they have a separate organisation there. So we negotiate with government and others on behalf of the sector. We also give advice to individual member organisations if they've got queries about what the legal requirements of ITE programmes or the rules about teacher education inspections are. And also we provide a forum for university teacher education providers to come together, share ideas, how they're doing things, how they're delivering ITE programmes to their students, for them to share information about the research that they might be involved in and latest pedagogic practices and the like. So it's three things: lobbying and campaigning, providing advice to individual member institutions, and providing networking opportunities for our members.
So it sounds, James, as though, there's a very much of a global strategic responsibility that you have within UCET and that UCET has in relation to teacher education in England and elsewhere. Are you mindful of your sort of professional identity within that, or is it something that gets submerged because of all of your other work?
Well, my professional identity is really reflected in what I do, but I see myself as an enabler and a supporter of the sector in different ways. So hopefully we do a reasonable job in promoting high quality research informed teacher education, sometimes protecting that from pressures from without, particularly, for example, the previous government's market review exercise, but also promoting it and expanding it where we can. So we established a group called the Intellectual Base of Teacher Education, which produced a report um, explaining and championing the importance of teacher education programs having a firm basis in research and new teachers being equipped to become inquiring professionals able to draw on, carry out their own research and contextualize research. So promoting teaching as a profession and not just a craft, as Michael Gove once described it.
And I mean, that's an important point, isn't it? Because, as you said, there's been this sort of political um, discussion, debate, conflict, even around, how do we actually position teachers in terms of their sort of professionalism and their relationships, both within the sectors and with other professionals. Do you think professional identity is something you see as important?
It's absolutely important. Teachers not only have to be professionals, they have to see themselves as professionals, act as professionals, as the vast majority of them do, realize the role they have in taking their own decisions, having a degree of agency in the work they do, not just deliver curriculum laid down by their immediate employer, but to draw on a wide range of research, albeit within agreed national frameworks, um, take their own decisions and do what's best for the pupils and students in their care.
And do you see your own professional identity as important? I mean, separately from USET and separately from, initial teacher education generally. I mean, is it something you're mindful of in relation to yourself and whether you see that as important in relation to you?
Yes, I certainly see it as important. I wouldn't just do something which is in UCET's or the members' interests, even if it was their immediate interest, if it conflicted with what I see as my professional responsibilities and professional outlook. Without wanting to sound too precious about it, I wouldn't do something that I thought was morally questionable, even though you could argue it was in the direct interest of my members. For example, if a government, not any recent government we had, said, if you sign up to this, we'll make sure all your members have a monopoly over the delivery of teacher education in the United Kingdom, but the content of the way they wanted our university members to deliver teacher education was a conflict with my values and our values, I'd say no, even though it would be in conflict or inconsistent. It would be beneficial financially to my member institutions, if you see what I mean. So there's law. Both UCET and myself have to act with a degree of a lot of professional integrity and not just take an expedient view. I mean, obviously, you have to be pragmatic when you deal with government. You have to recognize government has the right to govern and take decisions because they're accountable to the electorate. And a crucial part of the job is negotiating with government and saying, all right, if you want to do this, how about you go about it in this way, in a way which is consistent with our ethical framework, but meets your objectives as well. But we wouldn't, and I wouldn't just say, yes, we will do that, just because it's in our short-term interests, because there's not really much point in doing that. We're not just about securing the largest possible market share for university teacher education providers. We're about making sure that teachers have the best possible quality initial teacher education, which will benefit them and the pupils and the students who they go on to teach.
And I mean, you've alluded to ethics and values, and I mean, those things are crucial to any sort of professional identity,
Yeah.
aren't they? I mean, this is perhaps a difficult question to answer sort of briefly, but how would you encapsulate your own values in relation to what you do?
I would try to make sure I do what is best for the wider profession and not just for the short-term interests of the UCET membership. I would not do something which I think undermines other people's position. You know, I'm always the pain's been universities only comprise one part, albeit the largest part of the initial teacher education sector. We have school-based providers. I wouldn't do the dirty on the school-based sector just to benefit the university sector. So with our parallel organisation who represent the school-based providers, we work in tandem. We don't try and undercut each other. Um, we always try and speak to government agencies together with one voice, whereas if we didn't have a principled approach, we'd be talking behind each other's backs and trying to increase our share of the cake at their expense. What we're about is high quality teacher education, whoever delivers it, not just about picking up one particular sector. We think universities have an essential and a unique role to play, but when we are going to promote and champion that, but not at the expense by criticising unfairly other types of teacher education provider. So that's an example of the way ethical considerations will come into play.
And you've spoken eloquently already about the collaborative element of what you do, and you know your own identity as being sort of intrinsically collaborative because of these different stakeholders that you're working with. Um, I mean, hopefully, most of the time that is fairly collegial and supportive. But how do you manage conflict? Because there must come times where you've got these different stakeholders, whether they're government or universities or in teacher unions or whatever. How do you kind of navigate any kind of tensions or conflicts that might occur through that?
Well, you're right, there have been certainly been tensions and conflicts in recent years. I mean, for example, the previous government's market review exercise, which, as you well know, had a number of strands. One was to impose some rather restrictive new requirements on the content of initial teacher education programs, but also force all teacher education providers, both university and school-based, to reapply for accreditation. And there was at least some key people in government, not all, but some key people envisaged a massive reduction in the number of accredited ITE providers, particularly universities. We're talking maybe 20 to 30 providers compared to the 240 or so that existed before then. In the light of that, that was very tense, and we had some very stern and harsh words with people in government, and we did, and it's not my preferred way of working, launch a national campaign resisting those proposals. At the same time, however, you don't get anywhere by just shouting. You have to maintain collegiate relationships with government and with civil servants. So at the same time we were doing that, we maintained lines of contact almost daily with government civil servants and had regular meetings with ministers. And as I said before, I said, okay, this is the direction you want to go in. Let's nudge it in this direction instead of the almost nuclear option that some of your more ideological colleagues, particularly those, for example, in number 10, were pushing you in. And while the sector inevitably took a hit as a result of that market review exercise, maintaining those lines of communication so I could phone up senior civil servants and suggest alternatives. We also commented on their draft FAQs and secured some key concessions. You don't secure those kind of concessions if you just take an entirely antagonistic approach. So you can do both. You can campaign in a professional way without making personal attacks or anything like that, saying this is potentially disastrous, and being critical of the policy, not the individuals, but you also maintain dialogues because it's the second strand of that where you secure results. Big public campaigns are much less likely to succeed than maintain than negotiation, often which can't be visible, but it is more important. We had someone speak at our annual conference last year, and they were asked, how do you influence government? It is saying, how can we help you with this? And a lot of that goes unseen, but that's how you tend to get traction. So throughout that whole exercise, we spoke and said publicly exactly what we think, but we also took a collaborative approach. We never sold out on principles. We never said, "You're right, if you let us keep our market share, we'll do what you're bidding." We always spoke out, and I think we got the balance just about right. And the outcome of the market review, certainly in terms of numbers of accredited providers, was not nearly as bad as it was likely to have been at one stage. And in the run-up to the last general election and immediately afterwards, we published a manifesto. And as soon as the election was over, because we'd maintained this dialogue with civil servants, they invited us in, saying, this is what you asked for in your manifesto. What advice should we give to new ministers on the back of that? So we talked them through it, and a number of changes have been made. And even this very week, some of the de-accredited providers are being given the option to reapply for accreditation. So us keeping that professional relationship with civil servants under the previous government, when it was quite tense and there was an amount of conflict, gave us scope once the government changed to engage with those same civil servants in most cases and with new ministers, because they'd have gone to ministers and said, look, you can trust these people to behave professionally, to respect confidences and not do the dirty on you.
So it sounds like, in sort of summary, to sort of sum up, that your own identity is quite akin to a diplomat in some respects. I mean, would that be something you'd be in agreement with?
Yes, you have to have a diplomatic side to it, even within the membership, because we have getting on 400 member institutions. They're quite a broad spectrum as well. They sometimes have shared values and aims, but sometimes they have different priorities. and we have to meet all of those priorities, and the policies positions we take have to meet all of those priorities, and what we focus our energies on and our rather limited resources on has to meet the needs of the full range of the UCET membership.
James, thank you so much for your time with me. I mean, I think giving that kind of global view and that strategic view in relation to government and other stakeholders is I'm sure the listeners will find that fascinating.
Okay.
Carol, is there anything you want to add to the discussion?
Yeah, just one quick question. So, yes, I agree with that great overview that we've had there. I just want to pick up on something that James said about developing agency and that being important in terms of professional identity. So, I'm taking it back down to the individual now. I can see how UCET as an advocate helps support the development of agency, and I can see some of the issues that you've mentioned. And I just wondered if you had advice, particularly for new teachers, about how they develop, given all the restrictions, about how they develop their own sense of professional agency, what might that be?
Take considered judgments about how you teach and what you teach. See what flex is there allowed by your employer. Contextualize what you do. Don't just read out rote things. Just don't read out lesson plans prepared for you by someone else. Develop your own lesson plans. Undertake your own use leads and do your own professional development. Make sure it meets your needs and those of the profession as well as those of your individual employer. That's important. You know from NFER research that one of the reasons so many teachers leave the profession early on is they don't have that agency and they're not allowed to operate as true professionals.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, James. That's really helpful. You have been listening to Reflections on Identity. We hope you can join us for the next episode in our series. We'd love to hear from you, so please put your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to be notified of the next episode, click the bell icon or follow. Bye for now.